Have you ever looked directly into the mirror and failed to recognize the person staring back? Not because you've lost your mind, but because in that moment you realize you've been reacting too much, too quickly, too easily, as if your soul no longer belongs to you. You meant to stay silent, but anger slipped out. You wanted to walk away in peace, but got pulled back by words, glances, or emotions that were never yours to carry. We are not hurt by the world, but by the way we rush to react to it. There's a truth most modern people forget. Wisdom is not in knowing a lot, but in the ability to pause before reacting. In today's video, we'll walk through 5 ruthless yet profound Stoic principles designed to help you stay grounded amidst invisible chaos and touch a form of freedom that no one can take from you. The freedom from your own reactions. 1. Pause before emotion, where willpower is born. Modern people live as if they are constantly pulled by an invisible thread, and at the other end of that thread is the world. A careless word can ignite rage. An ignored message can stir anxiety. A misdirected glance can trigger suspicion. The world touches us, pushes us, and almost always takes the lead in shaping how we feel. Not because the world is too powerful, but because we've never learned to step out of the role of the reactive. Reaction is the most primitive behavior. It strikes like lightning without invitation, without reason. We grow angry without knowing why. We become cold, irritable, short-tempered, as if all our emotions are born outside of us, and we are merely the ones who suffer them. But the truth is this: no one truly controls us unless we react in the way they expect. And the more we allow the world to provoke unconscious reactions within us, the more passive, vulnerable, and easily manipulated we become. Between a stimulus and a response, there is always a gap, however small, a slight delay, a silent pause, a split second that, if we are mindful enough to notice, can change the entire outcome of that moment. But most of us move too quickly. We speak before thinking, act before listening, decide before truly understanding what's stirring inside. And then we live in the aftermath of our unchecked reactions, filled with regret, remorse, and sometimes ruin. Stoicism does not teach us to be numb. It does not demand that we sever emotion. It simply urges us to master timing. Because strength doesn't lie in feeling nothing, but in knowing when to express it so we don't lose our dignity. A man who screams in anger is not as fearsome as one who remains silent and observes. Not because he is weak, but because he knows how to conserve his energy for the right moment. And in that very moment of stillness, willpower is born. Willpower is not forged in grand victories. It is shaped in silent ones, like staying quiet when misunderstood, like walking away instead of arguing, like taking 3 deep breaths instead of firing back. These small wins draw no applause, no recognition, but they feed something else within you. Grit. Grit is not loud. It does not boast. Yet it forms the foundation of all strength that lasts. A person may lose everything: money, status, relationships, reputation, but if they still hold the power to govern their reactions, they retain a kind of freedom no one can touch. Freedom from the slavery of emotion, freedom from base instincts, freedom from living a life the world dictates. And from that freedom, personal power is born. Not the power to control others, but to master the one most unruly, oneself. Not reacting instantly is not avoidance. It is a strategy. A single slow breath can save a relationship. A nod instead of an argument can keep someone from walking away. A well-timed silence can halt a whole chain of chaos waiting to explode. And here's the strange part. The more control you gain over your reactions, the less you'll have to regret your behavior. Because everything you do now comes from a deeper place, not from your wounds, but from your growth. The moment you stop reacting is the moment you take the wheel back in your life. You're no longer pushed by the wind. You choose your direction, and perhaps nothing is more worth craving than the ability to live within a storm and not be swept away. There's only one way to do that. Pause. Right where instinct pushes you forward, take a step back. Right where anger rises, take a deep breath. Right where you want to shout, hold your silence. And you'll realize it's you holding the sword, not your emotions. Once you learn to pause, you'll begin to hear something that used to be drowned out by the world's noise stillness. Not the stillness of emptiness, but the stillness of a soul preparing itself. Stillness is not the break after a battle. It is the beginning of a new form of strength, a strength that doesn't need to perform, yet can make others hesitate by mere presence. In a world addicted to reaction, silence is seen as weakness. But the truth is, no one understands the cost of timely silence unless they've once let an impulsive reaction destroy what they cherished most. The one who chooses silence does not lack words. They simply understand that some things, once spoken, can never be taken back. They choose stillness not out of fear, but because they know too well the violence of unnecessary words, unneeded actions, and unworthy battles. Stillness does not make you small. It makes others cautious. Because they do not know what you're thinking, preparing, or about to do. And in that haze of uncertainty, you hold the advantage. The quiet cannot be read. The quiet is the only one with enough time to see the whole picture and strike at the vital point. In martial arts, the one who strikes first is often the weaker. In life, the one who reacts first is often the less composed. Stillness demands a strong foundation within a place you can lean on when the outside world begins to shake. Not everyone builds that place. It's not born of knowledge, but of experience. Of all the times you let emotions pull you away from yourself. Of all the times you said what should not be said, did what should not be done, and paid the price through long, quiet suffering. And when you've paid enough, you begin choosing stillness not because it's right, but because it's the only thing that preserves who you are. When others rush to argue, you pull back. When the world explodes into chaos, you retreat within. Not to escape, but to observe, to prepare, to strengthen. Because real power does not lie in the noise, but in the silence before action. And one day, when you emerge from that stillness, you will not be the same. You will no longer be easily swayed, easily read, or easily touched. You will have become yourself in an entirely new form. 2. Your reactions are a mirror. Don't shatter them, look into them. It's no coincidence that a random remark can choke you up. It's no coincidence that someone's indifferent glance can tighten your chest. Emotional reactions, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet, do not arise from the outside world. They echo from within, reminding you that something inside remains unhealed. Emotions, therefore, are not the enemy. They are a quiet map pointing toward the fractured parts of your inner world. We're taught to avoid negative emotions, that anger is wrong, pain is weakness, jealousy is petty. But no one teaches us that each of these emotions, when listened to properly, is a message from the soul. It doesn't come to degrade you. It comes to bring you back to yourself like a traveler retracing old steps to understand how they got here. Every time you feel pain, life is indirectly saying, look closely at this part of yourself. It's not steady yet. The problem is, we do the opposite. We resist. We suppress anger. We deny sadness. We rush to rationalize jealousy. insecurity, disappointment as if they don't deserve to exist. But emotions, even when rejected, live on inside us like underground currents, waiting for the moment to surge and destroy what we've tried so hard to build. A person governed by emotion is not weak. They are simply someone who hasn't learned how to sit down with their own mind, with courage, and without judgment. The Stoics never taught us to eliminate emotion. They taught us to observe it like an alchemist quietly watching a chemical reaction in a vial. When Epictetus said, "It's not events that disturb us, but our interpretation of them," he wasn't urging us to disconnect from feeling, but to look through our reactions and see their roots. Every emotional flare is tied to a belief, a memory, a definition forged in the past. And unless you're calm enough to trace it, you'll keep living the same reactive cycle without ever knowing why. For instance, a criticism that robs you of sleep isn't painful because it's true, but because you've tied your self-worth to others' approval. A rejection hurts not because they left you, but because you've abandoned yourself long ago. Reactions are never irrational. They're simply trying to lead you back to the origin of the pain. But you'll never find it if you keep looking outward instead of inward. And then, at some point, if you're patient enough to follow that map, you'll confront what every mature soul must face. No one can hurt you deeply unless you've already hurt yourself. This is not blame. It is revelation. Because if the wound is inside you, so is the power to heal. No one can save you by changing your circumstances. You're only set free when you turn inward and face every part of yourself, including the ugly, the soft, and the aching. Emotion is a guide, not a whip. If you listen, it will show you where to rebuild. If you observe instead of pushing it away, it will reveal the pieces you lost long ago. And if you're patient enough to walk alongside it without judgment, without hurry, without escape, you'll realize the very thing that hurt you the most can also lead you to your greatest strength. Not by suppressing it, but by going through it with eyes open and a heart unafraid of the truth. When you begin to view emotions as a map, you no longer panic when reactions surface. Instead of asking, "Why am I so weak?" you ask, "What part of me is this pointing to that's still fragile?" This is the shift from self-denial to self-observation, from escape to excavation. Every time you feel anger, jealousy, pain, fear, don't react too quickly. See it as a signal, a blinking light in your inner control system, telling you a structure within needs inspection and alignment. We often use reactions as defense mechanisms, as if by lashing outward, we can avoid looking inward. But no storm forms on its own. It's the result of pressure, heat, and currents. And humans are no different. No reaction is baseless. Each one stems from a specific place in the mind, a distorted belief, an undefined expectation, a memory buried in dust. And if you never sit down to peel back those layers, your reactions will return only with different faces. The Stoics didn't fight emotion. They went through it, traced it to the source, the root of reaction, and rebuilt from there. Epictetus once said, "When you are upset, ask yourself, what is this teaching me about myself?" That question isn't meant to control others, but to control yourself. Because every reaction is a brief conversation between the ego and the unspoken wound. Each reaction is a chance to disconnect from unconscious programming and rewrite your inner navigation. When you begin to see reactions as teachers without judgment, without rationalization, you'll start to notice something change. You're no longer pulled by every small trigger, no longer letting others define your worth. And at that point, you're not just healing, you're reconstructing your being one reaction at a time, one signal at a time, like a skilled craftsman repairing the most intricate watch. The soul. 3. Build a fortress within, where no one can enter. There is a kind of peace that forces you to clench just to keep it. It's a false peace built on avoidance, suppression, and moral veneers crafted to please others. But there's another kind of peace, quiet, steady, unshowy, and once you reach it, you'll understand. No one can take it away, because it doesn't exist outside of you. True peace needs no defense. It is strong enough to hold itself. Most people live in a state of easy influence. A cold glance can rob them of sleep. A simple rejection makes them question their worth. They live as if their emotions were public property, something anyone passing by can pick up, drop, or break. They call anger a natural response, label pain as proof of love, and convince themselves that sensitivity is a form of sincerity. But sincerity without boundaries is self-destruction. Emotion without shelter will always be carried by the wind. And peace that depends on others' behavior is not peace at all, but an illusion wrapped in fragility. The Stoics never denied emotion, but neither did they allow it to command their lives. They understood that the world will always be chaotic. People will always be ill-timed, inappropriate, or fall short of expectation. If your peace depends on others behaving right, you're choosing to become a prisoner to what you cannot control. But if you're clear-minded enough to build a strong inner world where emotions are acknowledged but not swallowed, where external chaos is just a knock on the door, not a battering ram, then you won't need to protect your peace. It has learned how to stand on its own. Some people radiate a still energy like a quiet lake, even in the middle of chaos. Not because they are numb, but because they've been through enough inner storms to realize no one out there deserves the right to shake their mind. Their peace doesn't come from smooth circumstances, but from no longer demanding smoothness to be at peace. They don't need others to be kind in order to stay soft. They don't need life to be fair in order to stay upright. They are calm because they've built a home inside themselves that no rain outside can reach. Peace is not found in avoiding conflict. It is found in not breaking when conflict arises. It does not come from outer silence, but from inner stillness. It doesn't need weapons to defend against life, because its stillness is already armor. And if you've ever felt like you have to fight for your peace, perhaps you've never touched its purest form, the one that asks for no defense, no tension, no control, only presence. And that is enough. True peace needs no protection because it's not something fragile, but a strength forged over time. And when you go one step further, you'll encounter an invisible line that not everyone has the courage to cross. The boundary between peace and freedom, where you no longer fear being hurt, no longer wait for apologies to be okay, no longer need life to be gentle to live gently. That is when you understand. When no one has the power to disturb your peace, you have entered true freedom. Some think freedom means doing whatever you want, saying whatever you feel, living without restraint, but that's only surface freedom. The deepest freedom is when your mind is no longer manipulated by others' looks, words, or behavior. When they can turn their back, criticize, break promises, or belittle you, and you still hold firm in attitude, clarity in action, and stillness within. You don't need to ignore them, and you don't need to act tough. You simply refuse to let them walk into the one place that only you are allowed to enter, the door to your inner world. The Stoics didn't define freedom through rebellion. They defined it through self-mastery. Epictetus once said, "As long as someone can make you angry, you are still their slave." It may sound extreme, but look closely, he wasn't speaking about anger itself, but about control. Every time you get angry over an insult, crushed by rejection, or paralyzed by disapproval, you've handed over the control of your inner state to something outside yourself. And that is the loss of spiritual freedom. True freedom isn't about having no feelings, it's about not letting feelings dictate your behavior. You may feel hurt, but not let that hurt turn into bitterness. You may feel disappointed, but not let disappointment turn into self-destruction. You may feel lonely, but not trade your self-respect just to get someone's attention. Freedom is knowing. Emotions may arrive, but they don't have to stay, and they definitely don't have to lead your life. A truly free person doesn't need to be understood. They don't live for validation, but for the alignment between what they believe and how they live. They don't need the world to be just because they've built a standard strong enough to resist being pulled by what's wrong. They don't need to prove anything because they already embody the proof. And if someone tries to hurt them, they won't react like someone stabbed, but observe like someone standing outside the wound, calm enough to ensure that cut doesn't become their definition. When you no longer let anyone intrude upon your peace, not because you shut the door, but because you've learned which doors to open and which to keep sealed. That's when you stop living reactively. You live by choice, and in each choice, you carry freedom not to strike others with it, but to remind yourself, I am no longer a prisoner of emotion. I am the one holding the key. 4. Emotions are like water. Redirect, don't block the flow. People often believe emotions are something to be controlled, even eliminated. That to be strong, you must be numb. That to grow up, you must suppress. But those beliefs have turned countless people into the walking dead. Calm on the outside, but inside an invisible battlefield. Rage buried, sorrow locked away, fear buried alive, and self-respect torn between being right and being like everyone else. Emotions don't need to be eliminated. They need a direction to flow. Like water, if blocked, pressure builds until it explodes. But when channeled, it can nourish entire fields. What the Stoics aim for has never been emotionlessness, but the ability to return emotions to their proper place. Not letting them take the wheel, but also not locking them in the basement. They understood that every emotion is a signal, and the first thing to do is not react, but observe. Anger isn't always hatred. It can be the voice of a boundary crossed. Fear isn't necessarily weakness. Sometimes it's a warning from intuition. Sadness isn't always negative. At times, it's a quiet reminder that you've strayed from your path. If you try to extinguish these emotions, you'll miss the valuable guidance they carry. But if you can sit with them, look them in the eye, you'll see what lies beneath. And from there, you can redirect that emotion into a new form of energy, one with intention, with integrity, with strength. Like a sword, emotion isn't dangerous if the one holding it knows what they're doing. But if your hand trembles, if you lose control, if you use it for revenge, you'll end up cutting yourself. One who knows how to live with emotion is not always gentle, but they are awake enough to know when an emotion should be released, when it should be held, and when it should be transformed into something useful. Picture someone in the heat of an intense argument. Someone insults him. The room waits for him to snap, but he doesn't. He watches. He stays silent, not because he's weak, but because he's listening within. He doesn't ask, how do I strike back? But what do I need to avoid striking and still keep truth and dignity? And then, instead of retaliating, he responds with a calm so still it silences the room. That is emotion transformed, not suppressed, not wasted, but reshaped into a quiet force. You don't need to disappear from emotion. You just need to restructure it. Turn anger into boundaries. Turn sadness into clarity. Turn fear into caution. When you do that, you're no longer a victim of emotion. You're its craftsman, like a smith forging metal from flame, hardening steel from ash, building a life not by avoidance, but by quiet transformation, day after day. When you understand that emotion isn't to be erased but redirected, you'll see something deeper. Transformation doesn't happen through a single act of will. It's not born from one fiery burst of resolve, but from quiet, persistent repetition, like water. No stream wears down stone in its first strike, but it keeps flowing gently, steadily, without applause, without needing to be seen. And time answers. We humans often crave instant change. We want anger to disappear after one meditation, fear to dissolve after one talk, sadness to vanish after one night of crying. But the mind isn't a switch. It's like rock, and emotion is water. If you force water to stop, you create floods. But if you let it flow consistently, in the right direction, it will carve through your inner world, wear down rigidity, and open a path you never expected. Emotional transformation doesn't come from resisting the wave, but from staying with it long enough that the wave no longer scares you. Anger doesn't vanish overnight, but it softens when you stop clinging to the ego's story. Fear doesn't disappear suddenly, but becomes harmless when you listen without running. Sadness doesn't evaporate in an instant, but stops drowning you when you learn to stand in the rain without begging for sun. Everything takes time, and so do you. In life, the most fragile person isn't the weak, but the one who forces strength. Because they don't allow themselves to soften, don't allow themselves to adapt. Don't accept that sometimes flowing with the current isn't surrender, but a form of wisdom. Water can bend, but it never loses its nature. It may change course, but always moves toward the sea. And likewise, someone who stays true to their stillness will not be distorted by circumstance. They will pass through storms with a softness others mistake for weakness. You won't become serene just because you read a few quotes. But if every day you return to yourself, recognize your emotions, redirect instead of resist them again and again, like water you begin to wear down the blind stones within. You're doing something no one sees, no one praises, but one day you'll feel it. You are no longer the same. Yesterday's anger passes without damage. Old pain touches the heart, but doesn't break it. You didn't win with a punch. You won with a patience that never asked to be admired. The strongest person is not the fastest, but the one who doesn't stop. The calmest is not emotionless, but one who feels deeply without being ruled. And the freest is not the unscarred, but the one who never lets wounds define them. Like water flowing through stone, not because it's stronger, but because it never gives up, so should you. Keep going, even slowly. Stay quiet, even when the world is loud, and one day, you'll walk through the boulders of your own mind, not with force, but with a softness that finally needs no armor. 5. Don't just survive. Become the one who rises again. Some collapses in life don't come with a bang. They begin as silent cracks, spreading from within, breaking you down in places no one else can see. You still go to work, still smile, still meet your responsibilities, but beneath the surface, something in you has shattered. It can't be named, it can't be shared, and it can't go back to how it was. That's the moment your soul knows the old version of you has reached its limit. We grow up burdened by expectations to hold on, to be strong, to be kind, to never fall. But no one teaches us that sometimes breaking down is necessary. Not because we are weak, but because what we're clinging to is no longer truly us. And without that collapse, we'd keep wearing a false skin, living by rules, roles, and relationships that no longer nourish the soul. That's not living. That's delaying an inevitable transformation. Seneca once said, "Only when thrown into a place where nothing is left does a person realize the one thing that can't be taken away is themselves." But that self isn't the ego you fought to protect. It lives deeper, revealed only after all masks fall away, after your layers are sanded down by time, betrayal, and loss. And yes, it will hurt. But that pain doesn't come to end you. It comes to tell you it's time to rebuild from the root. Collapse marks the end of a cycle, not the end of your life. It ends what no longer fits the old thoughts, old instincts, old ways of loving, old ways of existing. It doesn't strip you bare, it clears the space for you to begin again. Not with naivete, but with hard-earned clarity. You don't need to be anyone but the truest version of yourself. Those who have broken but not shattered carry a unique kind of silence. They no longer argue, no longer explain, no longer need to be understood because they've stood in the ruins of themselves and seen. There's still a self here. A self that doesn't need decoration, a self that can begin again, not for approval, not for duty, but for the freedom of becoming who they are, once and for all. When you've broken and still stand, the thing you carry isn't victory, but stillness. A knowing that needs no theory, a strength that asks for no proof. For those who've seen themselves fall apart and quietly swept up the pieces of their own soul in the dark are never the same again. But they don't need to be. Because rising after collapse isn't a circle, it's a line that ascends through pain toward a deeper, sharper self-mastery. Resurrection is not recovery. Recovery restores function. Resurrection rewrites essence. A person who has emotionally died and still chooses to live is not just strong. They have silently surrendered the desire to feel safe in order to walk into truth. They no longer seek refuge outside themselves. They become their own refuge. They don't return to who they were because that person is what broke them. They carry no illusions because those were burned in the fire that reduced them to ash. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "What stands in the way becomes the way." That quote isn't for the comfortable. It's for those who have fallen and now must choose whether to thrash or to let the fall become the beginning. The resurrected don't ask, "Why did this happen to me?" They ask, "Who will this make me become?" Not a self-pitying ego, but a will refined through trial. A character no longer shaped by fleeting emotion or others' validation. And the strange thing is, after resurrection, people speak less. They don't tell their fall as a heroic tale. They work, they show up, they're unshaken, because they know. Those who've never been broken won't understand, and those who don't need words. Pain is no longer pain, it becomes data. Emotion is no longer directive, it becomes a tool. The past is no longer a weight, it becomes a guide. And the future no longer an escape, but a space to rebuild without rush, without dependence, without needing to be defined by anyone else. Resurrection is when you no longer react the way you once did to what once broke you. The old self would cry. The new one is silent. The old self would rage. The new one observes. The old self would flee. The new one walks straight into the truth, with eyes no longer wet, but still warm. Not because they've become numb, but because they've realized. No emotion is worth destroying the peace rebuilt with blood, tears, and one lonely death. And then one day, when you look into the mirror, you don't see the person who fell. You see a pair of eyes that know who they are, a face with nothing left to hide, a heart no longer easy to crack, a life no longer lived to please anyone. That is not a return. That is an emergence proud, calm, and no longer easily broken. I used to think what hurt me was other people's actions. An insult, a betrayal, a condescending look, but after countless cycles of anger and sleepless nights, I realized. It wasn't the world that caused me pain, it was the way I allowed it to penetrate me. I didn't know how to pause. I didn't know how to exhale. I didn't know how to tell myself, not everything that happens deserves your reaction. There was one time I chose silence in a confrontation where I would have instantly fought back before. And strangely, I didn't feel like I lost. I felt light. As if for the first time in my life, I didn't need to win to preserve my worth. I just needed not to be pulled down. Sometimes, growing up is when you stop trying to change others and start choosing what truly deserves your response. If you feel the ideas in this video reflect the path you're walking, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next episode. And remember, choosing not to react doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've seen something greater. The calm of a mind no longer controlled from the outside. Be the one who is silent but never invisible. Be the one who is still but never insignificant. See you in the next video.